All right, let's talk about this update spaces method that we've been discussing in class. I said I was going to kind of help you through. So first, where would we even use this method? I'm assuming that just about everybody in their update game has something that looks similar to this. If the guess is correct, update the spaces. Otherwise, update like the number wrong or the wrong letters, whatever you were using. But when I say update spaces, I mean this thing. So we're just taking the spaces that used to be there and turning them into the spaces that should be there. Now the important thing to know about this is spaces are, I'm assuming, going to be stored as a string for everybody. So it's a string, spaces, and it equals, we'll get something. So what happens when you say this is you make a box called spaces that then points to some place in memory. So it's actually a memory address that will have a whole bunch of boxes in a row that might say something like H dash 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 O. That'll be our word hello when we're halfway through the game so far. All right, so that's what our spaces look like. When we're talking about our spaces, we mean that. So let's say I guessed L. You'd say, all right, well, it should be H-LLO. The problem you're going to have is that you actually can't change strings once they're built. You can add on to the end of them, but you can't modify things that are in there. So our only real option is, instead of changing this, is to make a new set of spaces, H-LLO, and then just change this arrow to point there instead. So that's what I want to show you. And I'm going to give you kind of the expedited version because I got class coming down in a few minutes, and also because I told you I'd just kind of give you this method. But we'll talk about it throughout. So let's, well, I might as well leave that there. I just don't want to get confused also. So let's start writing this method. Public, static, and I'm just going to say void for now, assume there's no return type. Update spaces. Spaces. And I'm also not going to put any parameters in. Now, this might be different for you. So in order to update the spaces, I need a couple pieces of information. I need to know the word. That's pretty important. So in this case, the word is hello. Actually, I don't know if you can see that. Let me peek. Yep, that's good. All right, so the word is hello. You also need to know the guess, which in this case was L. Now, guess is a char, which is a primitive type, which behaves differently than strings. So actually the L is in there, but for word, there's an arrow, and for spaces, there's an arrow. So we need to have all three of these things, otherwise we can't update the spaces anyway. You may need to put them as parameters or have them as global variables. In this case, I'm going to assume global variables. So what do we need to do? Let's do our kind of English first. I need to say that for each letter, so for each letter, I got to go one letter at a time. I need to check to see if it needs to be replaced or not. So if, for a particular letter, the guess is correct at this position, I'm going to add it to the new set of spaces, because really I got to remember we're making these. Right now these are blank, there's nothing there. We're going to build it one letter at a time. So basically I'm going to look at each letter and say, hey, if the guess is correct, let's add one thing in. If the guess isn't correct, we'll add something else in. So if the guess is correct, right, so if I guessed like L and I'm looking at an L, I say, oh, add an L to the word. It might be easier if we think about H first. So the first letter I should add should be an H regardless, because the guess matches that position. So the guess is correct. Add the guess to the new spaces. Otherwise, we're going to put maybe a dash in, but maybe not a dash. For instance, if I get here, I'm going to add a dash. But if I get to the O, I'm going to add an O again. So otherwise, add whatever used to be in the old spaces. Whatever was in old spaces. All right, so for each letter, if the guess is correct, add it to the new spaces, otherwise add to the old spaces. Now when I say new spaces, I'm referring to this thing here. Our new spaces that we're trying to build. All right, that looks like somewhat decent pseudocode, so let's try turning it into real code. Now let me just see if I have enough room over here to write. I'm gonna draw a line out in the middle of nowhere and see if you can see it. You can, that's like the very end, my first try. All right, so let's do this again. Public, static, void, update, spaces. All right, now it says for each letter and word, that's what we're talking about for each letter, so I'm going to say for. And for a for loop, we know we got 3 parts, so I'll put those little lines there. First part is to say what you're going to count with. I'm going to count with I just need a number to count on, kind of like my fingers. Count my fingers. So start at 0. I'm going to count by 1, that's the last part, I++, and then I want to count for each letter, so keep going when I is less than, let's say, word dot length. So that says look at each letter in the word, or at least count through each letter in the word. All right, next thing, if the guess is correct at this position. So if the guess is correct at this position, all right, so that means I got to look in the word and find out, hey, does H match this letter? Does H match that letter? Keep in mind, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, so we go through. So I have to have a way of getting the letter out of the word to look at it. And it just so happens there's this method called, so if guess matches, there's a method that strings can do called char at. So we're going to say, hey word dot, can you tell me what character is at position I? So this is going to tell, if I say char at 0, it's going to give me H. If I say word dot char at 4, it's going to give me O. So look at my guess, tell me if it's the same as that letter. All right. If it is, I want to add it to the new spaces. So new spaces plus equals the guess. Now, I have an issue here. I'm talking about new spaces, but they're nowhere in my program. So I'm going to go up to the top and say make a new string called new spaces. And when I do that, I make this block where I can put a reference. But right now it's null. It's not pointing anywhere. So I actually, and this is kind of the tricky thing that I wanted to do for you, I actually have to say equals blank. So quote, quote. And what that does is it makes a string, but with nothing in it. So there's a difference between, think like an empty sheet of paper and no sheet of paper. Neither communicates anything, but at least the empty sheet of paper you can write stuff on. So we have these new spaces are blank. Go through each letter of word. If the guess is or matches the current letter in word, then add the guess to new spaces. Otherwise, so else, otherwise add whatever is in old spaces. All right, so new spaces should have added to it whatever was in the old spaces. So old spaces, oh, can't say old spaces, it's just called spaces. My bad. Add to it spaces, dot, same thing, char at I. Now, make set new spaces that are blank. All right, so let's try doing this. So we have a new set of spaces that are blank. There's nothing there yet. If the guess matches, well, H matches H, so add an H. New space, or L, let's make this an L again because that's what we want to do. The old spaces. Does L match H? No, it doesn't, so add what used to be there, an H. Good. Go to the next letter. Does L match E? No, it doesn't, so add whatever used to be there. Well, what used to be there is a dash. Does L match L? Yes, it does, so add the L. Next letter. Does L match L? Yes, it does, so add the guess. Does L match O for the next one? No, it doesn't. So we're going to add whatever used to be there, which was an O. Looks like it works. The only last thing we need to do is remember this is new spaces, but we really want spaces to point all the way over here to this. So we're going to add one line after the loop that says spaces equals new spaces, and that should do it. Hope that helps. Bye now. Here's a zoom up view for you too, that you can pause on if you really need to.